The ceremony above the Dasan star looked grand from a distance. Serenithe ships formed an elegant ring of light. Horizon compact cruisers, blocky and practical, hovered just inside. Between them, a transparent dais floated, where Minister Amaya Chorus and Serenithe Delegate Helith drifted for the cameras. Pan-stellar reports streamed it to every human world, calling it a historic handover. The Serenithe Concord was granting the Horizon Compact full stewardship over the Dasan System, with all its assets. Those assets consisted of a weak amber star, a handful of rubble, and one pockmarked moon that scans had labeled geologically dead and economically useless, Oumaru. Commentators spoke politely of frontier development. Off mic, they called it a consolation prize. On Vandrick Prime, in a dim operations chamber far from the ceremony, Admiral Rourke watched without sound. The projection of Dasan floated before him. Transit lanes and potential jump corridors overlaid with faint lines. Dasan sat on the edge of mapped space, just off a natural bottleneck between the Serenithe core worlds and the region known as the Kharul front. Not a crossroads yet, but if the Kharul Dominion pushed further in, it would become one. Pan-stellar report zoomed in on Oumaru, a gray, cratered sphere. Low metal content. The feed's data ribbon noted. No atmosphere. Marginal radiation environment. Modest asset, Rourke murmured, his jaw tightening. Then his gaze sharpened. He saw the stable orbit, the quiet geology, the distance from major population centers. He thought of sealed files he had read in the depths of Vandrick's secure archives. He tapped a control, and the broadcast vanished, replaced by a new projection, Oumaru's interior model, overlaid now with lines and nodes from a classified proposal. At the bottom of the file glowed a name, Dr. Rina Kazemi. Rourke stood very still, watching the ghost of a machine that did not yet exist flicker through the moon's cross-section. If the Oruse relics were right, if the Horizon Compact's brightest minds were right, then a geologically quiet rock like Oumaru was exactly what they needed. He keyed in a single order. Begin priority transfer. Project Heliolance. Destination: Oumaru, Dasan System. And to Amaya Chorus, he sent a brief, encrypted message. They think they have handed us an insult. Let's prove them wrong. Far below the crust of Vandrick Prime, the Oruse Seedvault hummed faintly behind layers of human security. The original discovery had been an accident. A deep drill rig had chewed through rock, and then, suddenly, through something else. Instruments had returned readings that defied human theory. The team had pulled back, sealed the shaft, and called in experts. Years later, Linus Marcoux still remembered the shaky, disbelieving thrill of watching the first probe descend into a space where geometry itself seemed reluctant to behave. The Seedvault's contents were not simple devices. They were patterns. The Horizon Compact had named the main one the Oruse Lattice, an evolving structure of encoded mathematics and physics, as much sculpture as code. Under certain inputs, it responded not with answers, but with harmonies of relationships. Linus had spent years learning how to play it. Most of its insights were abstruse. Some, though, began to coalesce into something disturbingly practical. He sat now in the data chamber facing the lattice, its lines of light tumbling across dimensions. On his console, derived equations danced alongside it. "You weren't afraid to be clever," he murmured to the long-dead Oruse. "Let's hope we're better at surviving the consequences." The Massfold patterns had emerged slowly. At first, they were just fragments, hints that mass and spacetime could be manipulated in ways humans had assumed were purely theoretical. Gradually, a picture formed. Under the right conditions, one could create a fold in the local geometry that allowed a chunk of mass to effectively vanish from one region and reappear elsewhere, with a relative velocity determined by the shaping of that fold. The device that did this, if built, would not be a drive in the usual sense. It would be a launcher that used the fabric of reality as its sling. Linus had called it the Massfold Projector, only after his superiors insisted on a name. Admiral Rourke had sat through Linus's first formal briefing without asking many questions, eyes fixed on the projections. Minister Chorus had appeared via secure link, her expression carefully neutral. Linus had done his best to make the implications plain. With a stable anchor structure built around this core, he said, we can relocate large masses, asteroids, derelict hulls across tactical distances. They will arrive moving fast, with no warning trail in normal space. What stops you from misplacing them? Chorus asked. Geometry, timing, and humility, Linus said. Every bit of this is perched on the edge of instability. If we push too far or miscalculate, the fields don't fail gracefully. We risk creating localized zones where the usual rules of mass and energy don't apply for some period. Best case, a dead bubble in space. Worst case, something that spreads along stress lines. Spreads, Rourke repeated. Meaning what? Meaning, Linus said quietly. We could create a wound in space-time itself. Silence had followed. In that silence, images from the Kharul front glowed on a secondary screen. Worlds whose light had dimmed over months until the footage showed only shadows. The work of the Kharul's Sun-Shroud Net, a web of dark machines that throttled stars. Rourke's voice, when he spoke, was like stone. The Kharul have already committed to tools that kill worlds by suffocation, he said. We have a theoretical device that can throw rocks and ships, perhaps twist a siege engine's limbs. I am not saying the Oruse toy is safe. I am saying the board is already poisoned. Chorus had pressed her lips together. You're asking us to accept not only a new weapon, but an entirely new failure mode, she said. If we make a mistake, we won't just lose soldiers. We might damage the stage we all stand on. Yes, Linus said. But the Seedvault suggests the Oruse ran this kind of system for centuries before they vanished. It is dangerous. Not impossible. What do you need? Rourke asked. A deep, quiet, disposable rock, Linus said. Away from civilians. Geologically simple. A place we can turn into a giant stabilizer cage without anyone noticing. The projection of Oumaru appeared on the table then, summoned by Rourke's hand. We have just been given one, he said. Oumaru's surface felt like desolation when Dr. Rina Kazemi first stepped onto it. Fine dust rose in slow plumes around her boots. The Dasan star cast a thin, bitter light. The horizon was broken only by low ridges and ancient craters. She loved it at once. Perfectly boring, she told Petra Nowicka as the Marine squad leader approached. If it did anything interesting geologically, I'd be terrified to build what we're going to build. And what are we going to build? Petra asked. Her orders called this place a gravity research station. Her instinct called it something more. Rina smiled, expression tight behind her helmet. A question with teeth, she said. For now, you can consider it a big, temperamental machine that absolutely does not want strangers landing near it. Good, Petra said, because that's the sort of thing we're good at. Under Rina's direction, engineers sank drills into Oumaru's crust. Robotic moles chewed tunnels and laid down the Oumaru relay spine, power lines, data conduits, and anchor masses stretching from pole to pole. The spine became a framework. Around it, Rina's teams constructed the gravimetric shear array, layer after buried layer of field generators and stress distribution rings, encasing an immense central cavern. The cavern itself was carved into a near-perfect sphere. There, suspended on trusses and nascent fields, the first components of the Massfold Projector hung like the skeleton of some alien beast. Linus visited Oumaru once the core structures were in place, emerging from the shuttle looking more like a data clerk than a man about to help aim a weapon that could bruise reality. Rina hauled him out of the dust and into the heart of the project. He stared up at the half-built projector, awe and apprehension mingled. I've been living with this thing in equations for years, he said. Seeing it as metal makes my throat dry. We'll keep water handy, Rina replied. And fire suppressants. Lots of those. They worked well together. Rina thought in tolerances and error margins, in backup systems and kill switches. Linus thought in flows and harmonies, in how to let the Oruse-derived feedback loops breathe without losing them entirely. The first serious test nearly killed them all. It was meant to be simple. A tiny fold, no larger than a cargo crate, in a sealed lab chamber deep underground. They wanted to see if the gravimetric shear array could contain the stresses while the Massfold core nudged a small rock from one side of the room to the other. For a fraction of a second, instruments reported success. Then the ground heaved. To the people in the lab, it felt as if the floor had turned to syrup. Equipment and personnel sank knee-deep into a surface that should have been solid basalt. Walls warped with a sickening, liquid grace. Rina hit every shutdown command she could reach, hands moving faster than thought. The fields collapsed. Reality snapped back, but not gently. Rock shattered. A jagged chasm split the lab, swallowing consoles, cables, and people. Petra's Marines descended into the chaos on emergency lines. They found 2 technicians alive on a protruding ledge, battered and half-buried, and dragged them up through a shaft that tried to twist around them. 2 more were gone, crushed, or twisted away. When it was over, and the alarms finally quieted, Rina sat alone in an emergency shelter, hands shaking so badly she could barely drink the water Petra forced on her. "We shut it down," Petra said. "The moon is still here. That's something." "We got lucky," Rina whispered. "We poked it wrong and it nipped us instead of biting our heads off." She considered, very seriously, sending a message back to Vandrick Prime. "This is beyond us. Too unstable. Abort." Then reports from the Kharul front came in. They showed a colony under a yellow-white star that grew dimmer each week as the Sun-Shroud Net constricted around it. The final transmission ended in a slow pan over frozen streets and flickering lights before the feed died. Rina watched it 3 times. On the third, the tremor in her hands eased. "We don't get to walk away," she said out loud, to no one. "Not while they're doing that." The Horizon Compact Council argued through that same night. Some representatives, watching the Kharul cruelty, demanded immediate deployment of anything that could hurt them back. Others, imagining a runaway Massfold accident eating its way through friendly space, demanded that Project Heliolance be shut down before it left the lab. Rourke and Chorus made the case for a middle path. "We are not building a device to crack planets," Chorus said. "We are building one to shove ships. If we do our job correctly, it will never fire at a civilian target. If we fail to build it, however, we will be facing an enemy that chokes whole worlds while we preach restraint." Linus, brought in for a portion of the session, did not sugarcoat the risks. "We can design the gravimetric shear array to fail inward," he said. "If something goes wrong, Oumaru will suffer first and most, but we cannot guarantee nothing leaks beyond. Anyone who promises you that is lying." "In other words," a counselor said, "we are taking the most dangerous experiment of our age and putting it on a rock we are willing to lose." "Yes," Rourke replied, "because the alternative is eventually losing worlds we are not willing to lose." The authorization for full-scale testing squeaked through. Years compressed into months on Oumaru as work intensified. The gravimetric shear array's rings lit for the first time in full. Field lines whispered through the rock. The Massfold Projector's core came together, plates and coils nesting around a hollow where geometry would be asked to do strange things. When the day came for the first real demonstration, everyone who mattered converged on the central cavern. Admiral Rourke arrived from Vandrick with a face that looked carved. Petra stood near the security console, armored and watchful. Linus and Rina shared a platform bristling with displays. Their target was a small asteroid they had gently nudged into orbit around Oumaru. They had spent weeks attaching sensors and writing its obituary in case something went catastrophically wrong. "Outer array at 90%, Rina called. "Inner control fields holding." "Feedback loops in the green," Linus said. "We are slightly off resonance by design." "At your mark," Rourke said, voice level. 3, 2, 1. The Massfold core brightened. The air around it shimmered like heat over sand. Instruments screamed, but stayed within predicted ranges. In orbit, the asteroid flickered and vanished. Moments later, on the far side of the system, among a cluster of dead rocks pre-selected for the test, a new object appeared. It slammed into an uninhabited planetoid at relativistic speed, gouging a crater and throwing a plume of dust into space. "Fold complete," Linus said, almost dazed. "No uncontrolled sidebands. We just threw a mountain," Rina breathed. Rourke watched the distant plume bloom on the screen. "Congratulations," he said. "You've built the meanest slingshot in history. Outside Dasan, no one saw that first throw. But nothing stayed secret for long in a galaxy of sensors. Serenithe monitors flagged a brief but intense gravitational anomaly. Core and data brokers bought a strange spike from a freelance listening post that caught the faint whisper of Oumaru's fields. The Kharul, for the moment, noticed nothing. Their attention was on the Kharul front. There, the Sun-Shroud Net dimmed more stars. Wrath fleets rolled through struggling defenses. The Horizon Compact bled ships and stations as it tried to hold the line with courage and conventional tools. It was only a matter of time before the Kharul turned their eyes toward Gateway Narayan, the key gate that fed Vondrik Prime and the human core. That turn came sooner than the Horizon Compact would have liked. Multiple Kharul Wrath fleets altered course. Projections converged on Gateway Narayan. Simultaneously, smaller Kharul task groups seeded Sun-Shroud machines around the Dasan star. At Horizon Compact Command, red lights burned constantly. Debates ended. Orders went out. Operation Tidefall moved from contingency to reality. Rourke and Oruse delivered the news to Oumaru over a secure link. Kharul mass is converging on Gateway Narayan, Rourke said. They're also deploying a partial sunshroud around Dasan. They mean to cut us off and stamp us out. We will not have another chance like this. We're barely past our first proper test, Rina said. We don't know how the Massfold Projector will behave under combat use load. We know how the Kharul behave, Rourke answered. We know what happens if we do nothing. We need you to make imperfect knowledge work. Linus, listening, understood. Theory time was over. At Gateway Narayan, Commander Tolu Ilembe's carrier group dropped from Twist space into a system on the edge of war. Human ships orbited the station in layered shells. Weapon platforms pointed outward. Civilians had already fled or were huddled in shelter sectors. The first wave of Kharul ships arrived hours later. From Ilembe's cockpit, the Kharul fleet looked like a wall of knives. Long, angular hulls, drifting in precise formation. He had faced them before in smaller engagements. Never like this. Defense grid is green, Gateway Narayan's commander said over shared comms. Ready to receive guests. Let's make sure they regret RSVPing, Ilembe said. The battle opened with brutal clarity. Kharul capital ships advanced. Energy lances carving at human lines. Human warships darted and weaved, using the station's defense fields as cover and bait. At first, the Kharul advance was steady. They absorbed losses that would have shattered a weaker power. The defenders fought skillfully, but numbers told. Then the first pulse from Oumaru hit. Far from the main fight, in bleak outer orbits of the Dasan System, Rina and Linus had synchronized their team for Stage 1. The Massfold Projector's fields flared. The gravimetric shear array channeled unimaginable stresses around Oumaru's core. Under its invisible hand, a loose cloud of pre-positioned asteroids and debris blinked out of their lazy paths. They reappeared in the heart of a Kharul advance wedge at Gateway Narayan. To Kharul sensors, there was no warning. One instant, clear space. The next, an expanding storm of rock and scrap moving at lethal speeds. Forward ships died instantly. Hulls crumpled. Secondary explosions sprayed fragments into neighbors. Perfect formations shattered as each captain fought to avoid collision. On the human side, stunned cheers broke out. What was that? Someone cried on the station. A misjump. Don't ask too loudly, the commander said, recovering. Just shoot through the holes they've just given us. Ilembe drove his fighters into the chaos, dodging tumbling debris and fire. Human torpedoes found exposed flanks. Kharul vessels, optimized for coordinated doctrine, struggled to adapt individually. Stage 2 followed almost immediately. The Sun-Shroud Net around Dasan had begun its slow squeeze, dimming the system's light. Oumaru's power margins were already tightening. Rina knew they had to act before conditions degraded further. She and Linus calibrated the Massfold Projector not on rocks, but on nodes of the alien siege engine around their own star. It was like trying to tug strings on a web while standing on one of its strands. The projector's grasp closed on selected Kharul nodes. For an instant, their own fields fought back, creating vicious interference. Then several nodes vanished, ripped from their positions, and flung into distant, empty space. The Sun-Shroud lattice buckled. Holes opened. Light poured through. The backlash slammed into Oumaru's infrastructure. Rings of the gravimetric shear array juddered. Deep fractures raced through the rock. Warning icons lit Oumaru's structural model like blood vessels. "Hold it together," Linus whispered, fingers flying as he shunted feedback into sync channels. "Don't let the loops synchronize. Sway, sway." The moon shuddered but did not yet tear itself apart. In the Kharul fleet, controlling the Sun-Shroud Net, alarms howled. Power relays overloaded. Ships juggled failing systems, suddenly fighting both enemy fire and the thrashing of their own siege tool. Around Gateway Narayan, that thrash translated into hesitation. Shields flickered. Weapon nodes reset. Human ships seized the opening. The station's guns burned hot enough to blur their barrels. Still, the Kharul numbers were immense. Even under this assault, they remained a crushing force. Stage 3 had never been more than a what-if scenario in Linus's private files. Now Rina turned to him and asked the question with her eyes. "If we don't," he said hoarsely, "they may regroup and still win. If we try, we might break the toy and the table. And us," Petra added from her station. Dust fell steadily around her as tremors shook the chamber. Rourke listened to status updates from Gateway Narayan. Losses, gains, desperate maneuvers. He imagined telling the defenders later that he had held back to protect a moon. He did not like that story. "We built this to change the shape of a battle like this one," he said. "We may never have another chance to use it. Do it." Stage 3 did not aim for subtlety. Instead of carefully placed asteroids, the Massfold Projector seized whatever masses it could handle that would hurt the Kharul most. Jagged chunks of already destroyed ships, fragments of Sun-Shroud machinery, slabs of rock still spinning from the earlier chaos. Linus aimed not at precise coordinates, but along vectors, the approach lines of Kharul formations, the axes of their own advance. When he fired, reality around Oumaru seemed to tremble. The Massfold core roared at frequencies no ears could hear. Around Gateway Narayan, broken Kharul bones reappeared in tight clusters, hurled back along their own lines of travel. Crippled cruisers suddenly found their escape paths filled with high-velocity shrapnel. Flagships whose captains had been carefully pulling back were impaled by chunks of their own allies. The Wrath fleet's cohesion finally broke. Retreat orders went out, ragged and partially jammed. Some commanders tried to hold. Others fled, dragging stragglers. Human ships, themselves mauled, didn't have the strength to pursue deeply. They did not need to. The immediate threat to Gateway Narayan had been smashed. On Oumaru, the price came due. The gravimetric shear array wailed as if it were a living thing. One of its main rings slipped. Field lines twisted into patterns none of Linus's simulations had ever produced. "Oumaru's crust is going," Rina shouted. "We're seeing full structural failure in multiple strata. Cracks in the structural projection multiplied. Caverns collapsed. Surface fissures yawned wide. We have to shut it down," Linus gasped. "Now. All of it. If the loops run on without guidance, they'll chew through everything." Rourke did not hesitate this time. "Kill it," he ordered. "Vent it, burn it, drown it. Whatever you have to do." Rina and Linus executed emergency shutdown procedures they had hoped never to use. They dumped energy into sacrificial sections of the array, snapping support structures by design so others would not snap by accident. The Massfold Projector's core went dark, though not quietly. Each subsystem died with a heavy shudder that jolted the moon. Around them, Oumaru started to tear itself apart. Tunnels buckled. Domes split. In some places, the surface simply slumped as entire sections of crust lost internal support. Petra's Marines threw themselves into evacuation. Screaming alarms drove engineers from control rooms toward shuttle bays. Some did not make it. Collapsing walls buried them. Others were dragged out by Marines in exosuits, who treated falling rock like a slow, heavy rain. In one buckling corridor, Petra physically held up a snapping support brace long enough for 3 wounded techs to stumble past. "Go! Go!" she roared. "If you're breathing, you're moving." Shuttles lifted off under erratic gravity, engines straining. Some had to dodge sudden fountains of dust and stone erupting from Oumaru's surface. As if that were not enough, A remnant Kharul spearhead, enraged by the disastrous battle at Gateway Narayan, found the courage to break from their retreat path and burn straight for Dasan. Their instruments had triangulated multiple gravitational anomalies. As soon as Oumaru's fields flared and faded, they had a fix. "They're coming here," a comtech said, voice thin. "A spearhead, but heavy enough to ruin us." Commander Ilembe, bloodied but alive, got the same report. He looked at the wreckage-littered space around Gateway Narayan, then at his pitifully small surviving force. "We can't intercept them in time," his tactical officer said. "Not, and keep the main fleets honest." "We're not intercepting," Ilembe replied. "We're escorting." He vectored his carrier toward Dasan anyway, dragging a screen of escorts. If he could not destroy the Kharul spearhead, he could at least throw his hull into the path of anything that tried to chase human shuttles. On Oumaru, the decision was simpler and harder. "We can't fire the Massfold core again," Linus said. "Not in any controlled way. The array is gone." "We don't need control," Rina said through clenching teeth. "We just need one more ugly direct hit." She pulled up the inbound Kharul vector, and whatever mass remained in positions that could be used, half-buried reaction masses, derelict drones, even chunks of Oumaru's own crust that had broken free and were drifting. "We're going to throw whatever we still have left straight down their throat," she said. "Then we will die, or we will run." Rourke's face was unreadable. "If we don't stop that spearhead," he said, "they'll pound this installation into scrap and carry whatever they can salvage back to their masters. Then all we've done is teach the Kharul a new trick." Linus swallowed. "We can jury-rig a last firing mode," he said. "Minimal shaping, maximum brute force. After that, the Massfold structure will be so compromised, we might as well blow it manually." "Do it," Rourke said. They stripped safeties, bypassed broken rings, and fed every usable watt of power into the core. The projector flickered with a ghost of its previous strength. The Kharul spearhead roared into the Dasan system, accelerating hard. Their captains held onto their hatred. Their sensors, still bruised by earlier anomalies, were on alert, but they had never seen the same trick twice from an enemy with this level of technology. They expected a variation, not the same hammer. The Massfold core took one last breath. Mass vanished from near Oumaru. Splintered rock, derelict frames, even portions of the gravimetric shear, Array's own outer rings that had broken free. The fold, crude and wide, flung it all onto the Kharul vector. The spearhead hit a wall of its own future. Ships folded around impacts, breaking like brittle glass. A few in the rear managed to swerve, only to collide with their comrades. Their formation collapsed into a ball of wreckage and dying drive flares. Rina saw their icons fade on the tactical display and let herself believe, for the first time, that they might survive. Then Oumaru roared a final protest. "The core is overloading," Linus shouted. "Shutdown commands aren't propagating. The internal supports are gone. Everything is slipping. We have to leave," Petra snapped. Now, Rina triggered demolition charges around the Massfold chamber. There would be no salvageable technology for anyone who picked through the ruins later, Kharul or ally. Rourke paused just long enough to glance back at the central cavern through a shaking viewport. The projector hung there, glowing with residual energies, like a muscle torn from its bones. He bowed his head once to the dead, to the risk taken, and ran with the others to the last shuttle. They cleared the bay as a section of ceiling collapsed behind them. Engines screamed as the shuttle fought its way clear of a gravity field that no longer pointed consistently down. Outside, Oumaru cracked. From Ilembe's cockpit, still minutes away, it looked as if veins of light had appeared across the moon's surface. In reality, they were plumes of dust and vaporizing rock lit by the returning star. Then, slowly, Oumaru came apart, not in a single catastrophic blast, but in a grinding, unstoppable breakup. Chunks of the moon sheared off, drifting into new orbits as the remaining mass tried to settle into some new equilibrium. By the time Ilembe's carrier arrived to form a screen around the fleeing shuttles, Oumaru was no longer a sphere. It was a spreading ring of fragments circling the Dasan star. He listened to the ragged comm traffic from the shuttles and from Gateway Narayan. Kharul fleets were in full retreat from the main engagement. The spearhead that had gone for Oumaru was gone. The Sun-Shroud Net around Dasan had collapsed enough that the star's output was stabilizing. He exhaled a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You mad bastards," he said softly, watching the ring. "You did it." In the weeks that followed, fragmented recordings and sensor logs flew across known space. Panstellar Report replayed the story endlessly. Kharul fleets assaulting Gateway Narayan. Sudden, unexplained meteor storms shredding their formations. A human outpost moon destroyed in the same time frame. Experts filled hours of airtime speculating about mass transit weapons and localized spacetime manipulation. The Horizon Compact did not confirm details. It did not need to. The Serenithe Concord convened internal councils. Some elders shook in remembered fear of the Oruse's downfall. Others saw in humanity's act a kind of brutal courage they recognized. The Quarren League quietly updated its risk assessments and opened discreet channels to Amaya Chorus, inquiring about peaceful applications of new gravitational engineering techniques. Within the Horizon Compact, the arguments did not cease. Some hailed Oumaru as a triumph of ingenuity. Others saw it as a step onto a road that had ended badly for more than one ancient civilization. In a modest memorial hall on Vandrick Prime, Admiral Rourke read the names carved into light. Technicians lost in the chasm. Engineers crushed by collapsing tunnels. Marines who had held up the world for a few more seconds so others could pass. Amaya Chorus joined him, dark circles under her eyes. "Gateway Narayan stands," she said. "The Kharul are licking their wounds. Serenithe analysts are trying to decide whether to call what we did defensive innovation or reckless blasphemy. The Quarren are already asking about shipping applications." Rourke snorted softly. "Of course they are. They're also rethinking how they talk to us," Chorus added. "No one is likely to hand us a useless system again without thinking very hard about what we'll do with it." He looked up through the hall's transparent dome. Outside, the Dasan star burned clearer than it had in weeks. Around it glimmered a broad, irregular band of rock, the remnants of Oumaru, now a ring system. "People are calling it the Shield of Dasan," Chorus said. "They like the idea that a dead rock took the blow for us and left something pretty behind." "Is that what you call it?" Rourke asked. She thought for a moment. "I call it a warning," she said, "that we now know how to lean on parts of the universe we barely understand. And a promise, maybe, that we won't always be the ones having stars dimmed above our heads." Across the system, in a secure lab, Linus, Marku, and Rina Kazemi sat over a smaller, safer array of equipment. They had pulled as much data as they could from Oumaru's last moments. The drive Linus had shoved into his belt pouch just before evacuation now contained the most complete record humanity possessed of Massfold fields under combat stress. "We could rebuild it," one of the younger engineers said, eyes bright with unsettling eagerness. "Somewhere else, with stronger supports, better dampers." "Maybe," Rina said. "Or we could take what we've learned and start with things that don't break moons." "Emergency evacuation," Linus said, "moving crippled ships out of fire, tools for construction in deep space, controlled experiments in uninhabited voids, still weapons if someone leans hard enough," the younger engineer said. "Everything is, if you lean hard enough," Rina replied. "Our job now is to make sure the first stories told about this aren't only about what we smashed." Linus looked out at the shimmering band of Oumaru's remains. "We took a joke and turned it into a line in the sand," he said. "We should remember that courage and hubris are cousins." Above them, the shield of Dasan shone in the star's light, a scattering of stone that had once been dismissed as worthless. It had anchored humanity's boldest experiment, broken under the strain, and left behind a lesson carved in orbit around a system no one had wanted. Elsewhere in the galaxy, powers great and small revisited their assumptions about the species from Earth. They had given the humans a dead moon as a way to keep them quiet on the edges of war. The humans had answered with engineering, stubbornness, and a willingness to risk themselves before they risked others. The next time someone considered handing them a scrap, they would remember Oumaru and the way the sky above Gateway Narayan had filled with falling, impossible stone.